interesting T-shirt that says "Stretch the Numbers." And so,
Yeah, that's what we do.
but it's in yellow. It should be in red. So anyway, we all know Brook. He's got a great presentation here on the budget, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Brook Myrhe.
Thanks, Bob. I think whether it's great or not, I'll let you guys decide. But first of all, though, at the risk of offending everyone else in the room, I want to give this one gift out. Sorry I didn't bring enough for everybody, but this is, in case she wants to leave before I'm done.
Show off.
She's earned it. It has something to do with the shirt I'm wearing, which is not stretch the numbers. What does it say? And what do we want? Victory tonight. Is anyone, no, is there someone who's not paying attention to the Warriors? Oh,
How are they doing?
how are they? I only have 20 minutes, so I can't go into it. Okay, so first of all, I guess now that this is all being recorded, maybe streamed, and subject to internet comments from those people that do such things, which are very scary. I'm going to first of all say that the opinions expressed are my own and do not reflect necessarily those of the San Jose Retired Employees Association. If you don't know me, I used to do this stuff for the city. In fact, the format for the forecast and budget and all that stuff was developed way back when I was young, and it's still there. So that's why I can actually easily read it and understand it for the most part. So I'm going to try to make that as easy for you to understand as for me. And I'll tell you, this year things got a little bit weird. So if anybody spent 7.5 hours watching the mayor's budget message hearing on Tuesday, am I the only one? I didn't spend exactly 7 hours, but I did tune in at the beginning, and then I tuned in towards the end. And in the middle, I actually had to go watch the city council in Milpitas pass their budget. And I don't know which one was more interesting, but anyway, this one, in fact, because of the timing this year, I'm speaking a little bit later. Usually we haven't got an adoption of a budget by the time I speak. We actually got that on Tuesday, but it was close. It almost didn't pass. It went on a 6-5 vote, which is pretty amazing, because usually if you've been to those things before, as I have, it's 9 or 10 people praising the mayor for giving them such a wonderful array of goodies in his mayor's budget message. That's when he hands out all the goodies to the council members who have asked for things for their district. And so it's always been just a love fest. Well, this year it was totally different, so I'll get to that in a little bit. But you've seen this stuff before. We're going to talk about the forecast, which was done back in February and March, about what next fiscal year was going to look like fiscally. We're going to talk about some highlights regarding pensions, because there always are. We're going to talk about the mayor's budget direction, which is that piece of our process which allows the mayor and his professional budget staff to implement, recommend what they think how the budget should be shaped and how the budget should be allocated in macro as well as micro terms, so shall we say. So the city manager is not the only player anymore. The mayor and council get involved more extensively than they did 20 years ago. But that's what we're going to talk about. Because we've now been through that last day on Tuesday, we can actually talk about what their decisions were. So there you go. It's tech work. It's not bad. All right. We'll find the right slide. I think we got jumbled up here. All right, Dennis. Okay, here we go. We're going to start here. So just to give you some perspective, this is a slide I borrowed from Mayor Sam Ricardo, as you can see at the bottom. This is where we've been in terms of balancing the budget over the last, well, almost 20 years. You can see the huge negatives there. That's the problems that we faced in all of those years. And that's a lot of money. That's 100 and, what is that? It's he claims that we balanced shortfalls of, what, 40 million? That, I don't know if that's correct, but the challenges numbers, strengthened numbers anyway. So you can see that there was a lot of stuff going on in the early part of this century. And over the last 6 to 8 years, it's been pretty stable. When you talk about magnitude, our general fund budget is now 1.2 billion. Back then, it was maybe 800,000, or 800 million, that sort of thing. It was not as large, and the deficits percentage-wise were huge compared to the total. Now we are talking about probably less than 1% of a variance between revenues and expenditures. And things have gotten better in terms of what the services are being delivered. If you can look at the low-level numbers towards the left of the graph go up to 2008. I don't know why they have these larger numbers on their graphs, it's not mine. Anyway, so you can see we were in trouble in terms of paving the streets. Now, you can see we've improved dramatically because they've actually allocated some money to that. There was less than $20 million being spent on street resurfacing, repaving up until 2019. And finally, the council heard you and said, we got to do something about that. And they actually did a lot of things. They actually voters passed Measure T, which is a bond issue, the largest in the city's history, specifically to fund traffic improvements. And Jim Workball was immensely relieved to see that pass. We still have not seen the effects of that. Does anybody have problems with the way the roads are right now? I do. Is it just my streets? No. Well, they're working on it. So they've had a couple of issues. Number one, you got to spend all this money really quickly, and there's not that many people to do the work. Number two, a lot of the money that comes from Measure B, a tax that the county voted 3 years ago, in 2016, it was held up in court by some tax opponents who said it wasn't legal. So that's now been cleared, and all this money is now available. Now they're scrambling to find people to do the work. So anyway, just a long way of saying things have gotten better. And then the other thing that people care about, apparently most, the police department's emergency response standard. I used to do that sort of thing, measurements. There's a standard that says you need to respond within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. And that's the yellow line. And we only crossed over it. Sorry, Dennis, in 2018, we actually crossed over and became successful at meeting that target. So just to say that things are working better than they have, much better. We've come out of the recession, we've come out of probably the worst recession we've had for a long, long time, and we're actually on the mend. So here's the numbers. The forecast back in February said that we're actually going to have a surplus next fiscal year of $3.5 million. And now in June, they revised that to actually improve that picture. And there's now $5 million surplus going into next year. So what they did was basically take that $5 million and recommend using it to stave off future deficits. So some of that money got moved forward, reserved, and moved forward to protect against the next year's shortfall. That's why those numbers are a little different. But what you can see is that even though there's shortfalls in the second and third year and in the final year, they're really small, 0.9%, 1% of the budget. To me, that $1 million is a lot of money, but in terms of $1.2 billion budget, it's noise level. So all that stuff is fairly easily worked out, no matter what people say they want to gloom and doom you. It's really pretty reasonable.
What's the budget? How much?
$1.2 billion in the general fund. The overall budget of capital and special funds is around over $4 billion. That's a lot of money. We're going to focus on the general fund because the general fund is what pays for most of the public services that you see. The special funds like the sewage treatment plant fund, that's going to affect you every time you put something down the drain, right? But those are special funds that have their own revenue sources. The general fund is the one we focus on because it's susceptible to revenue changes, particularly in sales and property tax, things like that. So basically, we have a good news picture going into the first year about kind of $5 million surplus, which is great. As I said, we're really not talking about much variance to worry about in future years. Revenue side, up by $70.8 million from last year's budget. Big component, sales tax. The economy is doing well. The Silicon Valley, as you've heard, is doing well. We're spending lots of money. We're buying lots of things. Property tax assessments are up because, you know, the price of housing and the valuation of your housing, your property tax bill probably went up considerably this year as well. Business tax, which was a sore point up until 2 years ago when they revised it to modernize it, it was up about 81% when they changed the law. Now it's sort of cruising along, up at 2% this year. They're going to actually do an amnesty program, which they expect to raise another $1 million from that. People who haven't paid their taxes have an incentive to pay them and not take penalties. I know you're all interested in the marijuana tax, which I've heard about from you. So the marijuana tax was actually up 4%, greater than 4% from the second year that it was implemented. There's a couple things going on there now. They're expanding the tax to cover manufacturing, which is, I'm sure, growing, and oil extraction, things like that. The testing labs and distribution are also going to be taxed. You know, there was a change in the law that said, yes, Joe.
Do you know the dollar amount of the tax income on that?
For the marijuana tax?
Yeah.
It's in there. I'll have to look. I was curious, but you know, well, I'll have to look. So there's a little worry about that because everybody else around us is legalizing marijuana sales as well. So there's some competition that may offset the increased taxes on those particular aspects.
Is that what they thought it was gonna be, 4%?
Yeah, actually, it's higher than what they thought.
Okay.
It's higher than the estimate.
Higher?
Yes.
Higher.
Marijuana?
See, always the most interesting tax that we talk about.
Well, that's what
I'm not making any commercials, but there's that whole CBD thing too, which is probably not even recognized yet, because that's a whole new avenue for this particular revenue source. If that gets taxed as well, CBD is now the sort of politically okay use of marijuana, and people in your demographics are the main targets of those things. Just be prepared. On the expenditure side, again, things are going well, so there's really no cuts required in programs. Increase of $67 million for the year. $27 million of that is salary increases. Thank you very much. Committed additions for all the capital facilities that are coming online. It costs money to maintain those things. That's another $11 million. There's just a whole bunch of expenditure changes and additions that, if you want to read through the 30-page message and mayor's direction, you'll see a whole laundry list of things too numerous for me to mention. But there's a lot of stuff being added to the budget. Okay. You can see we're adding another 209 positions. 74 were deleted because they have this budgeting practice now that says, well, we're not sure that this is going to last, so we're going to add your position on a one-time basis and see how it goes. See if we have money for that continuing. So they try and reduce the use of ongoing surpluses by calling it one time. So they've deleted 74 of those. There's 115 totally general funded. There's 50 that are revenue offset for things like building permit planning processes. There's 118 in special funds. That would be the sewage treatment plant, the airport, things like that. So our total is now up to 6,600 positions. We're still well down from where we were back in the good old days of 2001-2. So as you've seen in the paper, a lot of times the mayor keeps saying, well, we're very lean staff because we only have a small number of people working for a larger and larger number of population. The population's grown a couple 100,000 since then, so we're doing for a lot more with a lot less. So, let's see what we get this time. Oh, I gotta go back. All right. I've just given away my punchline here. Here we go. In the pensions. Again, we're spending more and more money on the pensions, up 19.9 million. 314 million last year, 334 this year. There's actually a small percentage decrease in the percentage that our retirement payments are of the general fund. So what it's looking like is that things are starting to level off a little bit. So as the general fund grows, the retirement is not growing quite as fast, so the percentage of general fund is shrinking minutely. Over the next 5 years, we're going to get up to 352 million. Remember, when I was here like 2 or 3 years ago, it seems maybe it was longer, but the mayor was projecting like $650 million for the cost of pensions. Well, that's not happening. It is still going up, but it's not going up anywhere near that level. So actually, if you look in the 5-year forecast, the percentage of general fund declines. Not a lot, but still a lot. So,
Are the active employees paying more?
the active employees, well, remember, the active employees are getting less. You know, they didn't get, they, yeah, they're not getting health insurance.
Contributing to
Yeah, so there's a chunk, tier 1, which is us. Tier 1 is still getting what we negotiated in our settlement. We're still getting our benefits. And we're still costing them more regrettably, until our dwindling numbers start to kick in. But that's actually starting now. So the demographic is starting to peak and level off and eventually go down. And then, so tier 1 is going to start to go down over time. Tier 2 is not going to be ever as much because they don't have as much benefit. So, and here's the graph, and we've seen this before. This is I'm borrowing this from the mayor again. What this shows is the level of change. In black is the costs, and the orange is the percentage of the general fund. But you can see how horrific it was back when we were talking about the sky is falling and doing ballot measures to attack this. That stiff peak there is over, and now it's returning pretty much to a level of increase that's similar to what it was before that big crisis in 2007-8. So it's normalizing, and that's one reason why the mayor is saying, well, let's talk about it now while it's not catastrophic and there's not some imminent threat to decide what we ought to be doing with retirement. So things are getting better. So, okay, so the mayor's budget correction, taking these kind of things into account, as he said in March, the city's doing pretty well, but we're at the peak of one of the longest recoveries from recession in our nation's history. And the stock market is at, historic highs. So everyone's worried about the next downturn. So we don't want to see that downturn and that rise in deficits like we saw before. So the mayor is consciously putting a lot of this surplus away for the future. He's using some of the surplus for buying down debt, restructuring debt so we don't have to pay as much debt in the future. He's putting stuff into reserves for future needs. And he's actually spending quite a bit on one-time things to get out of the way. Public safety these are the things that he said were his priorities. The cost of housing and living is a huge driver of things now. And they do many surveys. Has anybody gotten a survey from the city of San Jose asking what your priorities are? Do you not have phones? I get like 6 calls, every year about some survey that the city wants to do. So they actually do survey people, and there are active measures to go to neighborhoods and council districts and find out what people's needs really are. And this is what came out of that effort. So this is what he's focused on. Interesting, and we just talked about this earlier, the March message, because of this sort of hiatus here from the crisis of retirement, he wants to convene stakeholders, including us, to calmly, in his words, address future threats from escalating retirement costs. And I think that's a good thing. And Bob may have something to say about that. We're invited to participate in that effort. And then the second thing they're talking about in this was in the newspaper and a couple of those San Jose Inside type web pages on the web, that they're actually looking at another bond measure or new taxes to address affordable housing and or homelessness. One of the things, they've just been successful at getting ballot measures passed, and bonds may not be the way to go, because if you do bond, you have to have 66.6% approval to get those bonds. If you do a tax increase and it's a general tax, you only have to have 50% plus. So the theory now is they may go to talk about this at the council and talk about going for a new tax on the November ballot or later, which would be in addition to the conveyance tax. And so when you buy and sell property, when you buy property, there's a fee that the city gets on that transaction. And right now it's about $3.30 per $1,000 on your house. They want to add an additional $4.99 to that per 1,000. And they think that that's going to generate up to like $54 million, which would be a nice chunk of change to save a lot of these major things that we haven't planned for. So right now, it looks like that has potential to pass, because it was 59% supported it in the poll they did. So you can look forward to that. They're exploring revenue situations or revenue solutions that won't directly affect you, will affect the people who are trying to buy your $1 billion home. So that's something to think about. And then the final word there, equity. I don't know if anyone listened to this discussion, a 7-hour discussion, or if you read the paper, there's been a couple articles and editorials about this concept. Equity, what does that mean to you? What does equity mean to you?
Equity in your home.
Equity in your home, right? Or your stock, right? Stocks are equity in corporations. Well, that's not the sense that they're using. Equity, what's the other meaning of equity?
Treat everyone equally.
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
Equity. Anybody?
Justice. To be equal.
Justice,
Equality.
equality, fairness. I mean, fairness is one of the terms that people use, okay? One of the things is lack of partisanship, which is another, sort of an oxymoron when you talk about city councils. But equity is the term, and so the big discussion that almost derailed the mayor's approval of the mayor's message. The 5 council members decided that they would not support the mayor's message, even though he handed out a whole bunch of stuff to a bunch of people in neighborhoods.